Welcome to your essential business briefing. I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up, what can be done about the widening gap between the world's rich and poor? We'll delve into the detail of a major global study on inequality. Clocking off, what does the right to disconnect really mean in practice for workers? And upcycling with a twist, we meet the French entrepreneur who's making tracks with old bike tyres. It's one of the more perverse facts of the COVID-19 pandemic. Billionaires saw a massive increase in their share of global wealth in 2020. In fact, the jump from 1% to 3% last year was the steepest increase on record. That's just one detail from the World Inequality Lab's latest report. It shows how the richest 10% of the population currently holds 76% of global wealth and takes home more than half of global income, while the world's poorest 50% only holds 2% of wealth and accounts just for 8.5% of income. Lucas Chancel is the co-director of the World Inequality Lab, and he joins us now. Luca, what has happened to inequality during the pandemic? How much of a change did we see since 2020?
Well, clearly the pandemic has exacerbated global inequalities at the top and at the bottom. First, we observe this very steep increase in billionaire wealth. More than 3,600 billion euros were added to the net wealth of billionaires during the crisis, during this phase when economies were really under lockdown and receiving a lot of support from governments. And at the other end of the spectrum, in countries like India, countries like Brazil, Sub-Saharan Africa, we observe 100 million more people in a situation of extreme poverty. So really, this is a world where inequalities are more exacerbated than they were late 2019.
You point out the difference in your report between the inequality in income and the inequality in wealth. How does that differ?
So income is what you earn, and wealth is what you own. Wealth is a stock. And what we observe is that wealth is always more concentrated than income. In fact, some regions in the world are faring relatively well in terms of income inequality, like Europe, for instance, was able to contain the rise of inequality, income inequality we observe in other regions. But when it comes to wealth, really, everybody's doing pretty bad. There is no region in the world where the poorest half of the population owns more than 5% of all wealth. So you see that wealth inequalities are really extreme, and that's the case everywhere.
What are the policies that are contributing to this? Or is it something that's happening organically as the rich get richer?
Inequality results not of laws of nature, but of economic policies. And so, if countries want to tackle it, they can with social policies, with redistribution policies, with tax policies. One thing we've observed over the past decades, for instance, is the reduction of tax justice or of tax progressivity. By this, I mean that the very wealthy have been paying less and less taxes. When we express these taxes as a share of the income they pay, well, the very rich pay less than the middle class or than the working class in many rich countries today. And this contributes to fuel inequality. This also makes it more difficult for governments to finance public services like access to education, access to health, access to transport. These public services are so key to keep inequality in check, but you need to finance them. And if you don't have everybody contributing to their fair share, well, it's very hard, again, to keep inequality in check. But again, the good news is that it's all about political choices. There's no fatality to this.
One of the choices that you're suggesting that policymakers make is a wealth tax. How would you see that working, and what effect could that have on reducing inequality?
Well, first, a wealth tax might help us, would help us, contain this very steep increase in billionaire wealth that we've been observing during the crisis and over the past 30 years. But the other good thing is that with relatively small tax rate on billionaires because they own so much. Relatively small tax rates are going to generate a lot of money for governments to invest in, providing funding for universities, for hospitals, which have been really hit hardly by the crisis everywhere, and also funds to invest in the ecological transition. So in the new challenges of the 21st century. So really it's these two things, tackling inequality at the very top, but also investing at the bottom and for the middle class.
Wealth taxes we've seen in countries that have introduced them haven't yielded the results that they'd been hoped for. Is there a way to do this right?
Yeah, I mean, we can very much learn from past experiences and learn from the rest of the world. Again, this is one important key findings of this report. When we don't just look at ourselves, when we don't just look at the present time, but have a broader historical perspective, we learn so much. And in fact, with all this learning, we can modernize, we can improve, we can make more efficient, more effective, more sustainable these taxes and these tax systems. And clearly, there's a lot of scope to improve these wealth taxes in the years to come.
You point to the recent international deal on corporate taxation as something that's a positive development. How could that be expanded further, or is that a model that could help us to solve this problem?
Well, first, this deal, which says that all corporations, wherever they operate in the world, should pay at least 15% minimum corporate tax. This deal is very interesting because 10 years ago, everybody was saying this is completely impossible and this would never happen. All countries will never agree on such a thing. Now we see that countries can agree on that kind of agreement. And what we say is that this is still too low because 15% is still less than what are going to pay smaller economic actors that are not multinationals, but that might be taxed at 25% and 30% in some countries. So there's still this inequality between the big actors, the big players, multinationals, and the rest. But still, it tells us that progress is indeed possible and that we can do more and we can do much more in the months and in the years to come.
Okay, Lucas Chancel from the World Inequality Lab, thank you very much for speaking to us. Now, Portugal is the latest European country to introduce a right to disconnect for workers. It imposes a duty on employers not to contact staff during their rest periods except for emergencies. The measure was part of a package for employees which included making expenses related to working from home tax-free. Kate Moody's here with more on this. Kate, first of all, what exactly is the right to disconnect and which countries have it in place?
Well, it's basically the protection of the work-life balance, Stephen. The EU describes it as the right for workers to switch off their digital tools outside their working time without facing consequences for not replying to emails, phone calls, or text messages. The European Parliament has called for bloc-wide legislation, although for now only 8 member states have enacted laws. France is seen as the leader of the pack. Its right to disconnect rules were brought in 2016 and apply to companies with more than 50 employees. India, Argentina, and the Philippines are among those with similar labor laws, all offering different levels of protection.
Does it work to help improve work-life balance?
Well, in theory, studies do show that limiting after-hours work communication can reduce stress and protect mental health. That's become especially important during the coronavirus pandemic, with more people working from home and juggling professional and personal responsibilities. In Europe, more than a quarter of remote workers say they're now working during their free time several times a week, while in France, the number of burnouts has doubled since the start of the pandemic. All that can lead to a drop in productivity, so disconnecting may in fact improve performance during work hours. In practice, though, there is little concrete data about just how effective these policies are, and the pandemic has made it harder to both apply and assess them.
How could then it be improved?
Well, legislation plays a very important role here, but labor experts say that the key is really changing culture in the workplace and making sure that workers know their rights. They argue that people who cannot disconnect should be compensated, either with extra pay or vacation time, which gives employers a financial incentive to respect that work-life balance. Momentum is growing. The EU increasingly sees this as a fundamental right in the new digital era.
Kate Moody, thank you. Next, to an environmental problem that's become a business opportunity. Tens of millions of bicycle tyres are thrown away in Europe every year. It's inspired one French entrepreneur to give the old rubber a new lease of life. Emerald Maxwell has the story.
It was commuting by bicycle that gave Hubert Mutt the idea. Concerned that in the race to save the planet, his worn-out tyres shouldn't end up in the dump, the engineer thought up a novel way of putting them to use elsewhere.
C'est plus de 10 millions de pneus de vélo qui sont incinérés chaque année. L'idée, c'est de faire mieux que ça, d'arrêter de les brûler. Et surtout, si on peut en faire des objets du quotidien qui soient utiles.
Hubert decided to turn these old tyres into belts. His local bicycle repair shop in Lille was happy to provide the raw material, and the 29-year-old honed his craft with the help of leather makers and cobblers.
Ce qui est chouette avec le pneu de vélo, c'est que c'est une matière qui est élastique, mais à la fois qui est solide. Et à la différence d'un cuir qui va avoir tendance à se tendre au fur et à mesure des années, le caoutchouc garde très bien sa forme initiale, mais en revanche, au porté, elle a une certaine souplesse.
Hubert began by making the belts himself at home, but his Lavier belt business has come a long way. 4 years ago, he moved production to this workshop, which now employs 6 people.
Tout est fait à la main. Ça rend ces objets particuliers. À chaque fois, je donne le meilleur de moi de faire des belles ceintures pour eux, parce que je vois que voilà, Hubert, il fait ça pour la planète.
10 tons of tyres have been recycled in 4 years. The belts are sold for around 40 euros a pop, online or in eco-friendly stores. Here in Lille, they're a bestseller.
Là, on a les traces du pneumatique. Je trouve ça sympa. Je trouve ça joli. Dès le départ, je trouve l'idée très originale.
On dirait presque du cuir. Non, franchement, c'est très bien fait.
Hubert has now expanded into recycling other materials, giving old fire hoses, climbing ropes and sheets a new life as underwear and accessories.
That's it from us for now, but you'll find all of our previous shows on the France 24 website and as a podcast wherever you usually listen. Plus, we're on social media if you'd like to get in touch with any comments or questions. Until next time, thanks for watching.